Well, as people roll in, maybe this is a good time to get started because we don't want to take up too much time. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, traditional owners of the land that we conduct our business on, and respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging. So, Wominjeka, and welcome everyone. It's great that you're all here with us this morning for our webinar on programmatic ABM. If this is your first xGrowth webinar, you can watch some of our past sessions on the xGrowth YouTube page, or you can listen back on our podcast, Growth Colony. Just Google the Growth Colony podcast. And joining us today on the panel, we have Sue-Marie Lottering, Senior Digital and Brand Manager at DocuSign APAC, Brand Marketing Manager at DocuSign APAC, sorry. We have Shelby Crabtree, Senior Customer Success Manager, Strategic at Rollworks, Shaheen Hoda, Director at xGrowth, and of course, we also have Andrew Thompson, Managing Editor at Shift Research, who's going to be moderating today's session. On that note, I'm going to pass it on to Andrew to run the rest of the session. So thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Over to you, Andrew. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Alex, and good morning to everyone out there, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about programmatic account-based marketing campaigns, otherwise known as one-to-many. With a team of industry experts, as Alex mentioned, we're going to provide actionable insights and advice that will help you successfully roll out programmatic ABM campaigns. But before we jump onto how to plan and deploy, let's go through exactly what we're talking about when we refer to programmatic ABM. To do that, I'll borrow from xGrowth's guide to starting with account-based marketing, which can be downloaded from their website. Programmatic, or one-to-many, is one of three tiers of ABM, the other two being one-to-few and one-to-one. It's focused on a large number of accounts and tailoring campaigns at scale. The key to this style of ABM is having the right balance between personalisation and scale. Compared to the other tiers, this one-to-many approach is more reliant on technology. This is because one-to-many campaigns require targeting and delivering a personalised message to a large number of accounts, sometimes in the thousands. If you're targeting upper mid-market enterprise companies and government entities, then this session is tailored for you. So without further ado, let's jump to our panel and get some practical, actionable insight from the experts on exactly how to deploy it. But as I mentioned by Alex, make sure you put your questions in the panel below throughout the webinar, because we'll be jumping to them both throughout and after the webinar. So let's start with you, Shelby. In terms of what are the best marketing environments / accounts to deploy a programmatic ABM campaign, can you take us through that?
Yeah, so I would say realistically, all market environments are prime for ABM. The thing where you really might see a shift is in the strategy. So I think the thing that's important to keep in mind is ABM isn't about replacing your traditional channels, but rather optimizing them. So from an objective perspective, ABM can really help you optimize across the entire buying journey. So anything from air cover and nurturing through pipeline acceleration and expansion. And so based on that, and looking at the account perspective, what ABM is doing is we're using data to help you identify the right accounts to get in front of at the right time. And so ultimately, it's making you more efficient. So a couple ways that this can be done is you can align the accounts that you're targeting based on your ICP. You can leverage intent or engagement signals to help you prioritize in-market accounts. And that ultimately will help you increase opportunity creation or deal size. And then also you can engage accounts within your pipeline. So here at Rollworks, we refer to it as journey stages. And by doing so, that can help you to increase your close rates and acceleration from time to close. So as far as going back to the market, I think it is worth noting that our current market is actually particularly important for ABM. Reason being that there's a good deal of uncertainty with marketers being asked to put tighter controls around their budget while still operating in a very complex environment. And so essentially the goal being the ability to have those efficiencies and increase those efficiencies when you have tighter constraints is going to be critical.
Fantastic. Any successful case studies that really pinpoint the core differentiating factors that programmatic ABM provides within that right environment?
Yeah, I can speak to actually specifically what we've done at Rollworks and seen at Rollworks. So we do leverage our own platform and data to run our own marketing campaigns. And we were able to discover by identifying the right target accounts, we found that 20% fewer leads were needed to match the same amount of MQLs. And then in addition, by running hyper-targeted campaigns to the accounts while also having our SDR teams reaching out to those same accounts, we saw a 20 to 50% increase in SDR response rate.
Fantastic. So, Marie, if you, in terms of, when programmatic ABM campaigns are not suitable, is that something that you can share with us where you've found it sort of, not applicable to what you're doing?
Well, ABM marketing approach is typically more suited for enterprise organizations who are trying to land and expand their products and services into a list of identified targeted accounts. So ABM programmatic, as you have seen on the screen, is a layer within that broader ABM marketing approach. So at DocuSign, we only target our larger accounts with this approach, not our smaller SMB accounts, because the larger accounts typically have more opportunity to expand and do cross-selling for the solutions that you are marketing. So that is our approach in terms of that. ABM programmatic is also the easiest and most scalable of the 3 tiers of an ABM strategy to execute on. But you have to have the right focus, strategy, and resources tools to drive this successfully. So if you don't have technology partners like Rollworks, for example, it will be more difficult to scale your programmatic programs or even start with a programmatic program. However, the other thing is also when your marketing efforts are predominantly measured on short-term impact and volume-based results, ABM in general might not be the best approach, and ABM programmatic also not be the best approach, because you need to take time and allow time for your programs to launch and then to look at the performance, identifying the appropriate accounts. It is not a quick fix. It's not a volume play, and it's definitely not something that you would necessarily see immediate SQOs or MQLs coming from. It is a journey where you need to take the time to influence those accounts that you want to target. IBM is all about driving quality over quantity with a targeted approach, and it is definitely different from demand gen. So if your objective is demand gen, then IBM programmatic might not be suitable for you.
Okay, Shaheen, you work across multiple clients. Have you seen examples where people have sort of tried to do it and it just hasn't been fit for purpose?
I think the most important thing to think about when it comes to ABM as a whole, now whatever tier you're looking at, is that level of personalization. One of the challenges that a lot of people have, especially if they're starting with ABM, is how much do I personalize? And they keep thinking about, okay, I can personalize more and more and more and more. And before they know it, they're down this rabbit hole of personalization. And they're like, well, I can't do this across even 5 accounts, let alone, hundreds or thousands, which you're really talking about in programmatic ABM. I think that is one of the biggest challenges when with an organization that starts. The other big challenge that Sumeri touched on is it's not a volume game. And this is not only important for marketers to understand, but it's also important to communicate to the management and leadership, because if you are saying that we're going to be running an ABM program, it's going to be great, and then 3 months later, management is on your back and asking where are the results, which happens if you haven't set the expectations right, then the program is going to fall apart, because on month 4, they're going to be like, this is not getting us results, and we gotta shut it down. Let's go back to lead gen or whatever it is. I think that expectation setting, that human element of ABM, is really crucial, and is something that if management is not bought in, if the expectations are not set properly, it becomes a very hard battle for the marketers to execute on that. So those are some of the probably high-level components, the 2 high-level components that I would say makes ABM fall flat and makes it really challenging down the line.
Shelby, have you seen any examples or case studies where it has fallen flat because it was applied to the wrong account or market environment?
Yeah, I would say what we typically see is, so if you consider the ABM is about getting in front of the right accounts at the right time with the right messaging, a common mistake is that I'll see a customer will target a static list of accounts that they aren't frequently updating. They use limited creative that they're delivering against audiences that are really in different stages of awareness. And so essentially what they're doing is they're working off of a list of accounts that's potentially grown stale, and then they're also potentially suffering from creative fatigue. So where ideally how you want to think about your ABM program is really establishing dynamic syncing with your CRM and marketing automation so that you're always in front of the right accounts, and then leveraging those intent and engagement signals so that you can tailor your message to meet the customer where they're at in their buying journey. And then furthermore, I would add, we can also leverage that data to discover new accounts. So you're not always even necessarily working off of a static list, but you can actually find accounts to expand your reach.
Fantastic. Now moving to Sumari, in terms of a marketing perspective, what are the key ingredients when planning ahead of implementing a successful programmatic ABM campaign?
Yeah, Shaheen and Shelby has touched on a few things that is also applicable from a marketing perspective. It's really important to align on your business objectives and understand your ideal customer profile. And you need to align your business objectives with your stakeholders around setting the expectations on what this is, how it works, what we expect the outcome could be, and that it will be a long-term play. So that's really important. Then you also need to align with your sales org on their targeted accounts and industries that you want to go after. This can be done using your own data, intent data that you can get from providers like Rollworks. So it is really important to make sure that you are aligned with that sales org in terms of who those targeted accounts are, because the other thing is it can create confusion when marketing goes after a set of accounts, but then it's not a priority for sales. The other thing is to set campaign goals, objectives, metrics, and expectations upfront. Then we would also like to look at that data that I've just mentioned, but also what can we incorporate into our campaigns, and then select the best technology and tactics that will support your objectives and your goals. The last thing is also to set up budget to execute on the campaigns. It's really important that you know that it doesn't have to be millions. People do think sometimes you have to have a large budget. You can do it with a fairly limiting budget, especially for programmatic ABM. But then you also need to strategize with your platform and solution provider to ensure that you are all on the same page in terms of the outcomes that you're going after, that you want to achieve, so that you can take full advantage of what the platform or technology that you partner with is, so that you can know that do you have certain integrations with certain tech stack, or if there is a lack of that integration, what other things can you get out of the platform to enable you to drive an effective strategy. Then you also need to think about building your messaging and creative. And for me, it is really important to cover all stages of the funnel from an awareness, consideration, and conversion standpoint, because you have the insights into those accounts that looks like a great fit for your offering, but you're still dealing with people. You're still trying to reach out and get people engaged in your brand. So it's really important to make sure that your creative and your messaging supports that every stage of the journey and drive them back to your website, making it very enticing for them to drive traffic back to your website to look at what your offering is. And then the other thing is also to set up the campaigns effectively and monitoring for success. But also an important component of that is to share key insights of the newly discovered accounts, but also activity that's happening in your accounts that is on sales radar, because this allows you to show them the value of driving an ABM programmatic program, but also what's in it for them. It gives them additional insights in terms of what's happening in their accounts. They might be not engaging with that account at this point in time, but through the ABM programmatic programs, you can actually show them there have been significant increase of engaged visitors to the website from that account. So you might have had a conversation with them 6 months ago, but now is a good time to re-engage with them again because there's definitely increased activity. So you definitely need to keep an eye on how your campaigns are performing and monitoring for success, but also share that insights back to the sales org, share the learnings, and then also the other important part of it is constantly refresh your account list and creatives on a regular basis, as Shelby was saying, because people can get that creative fatigue. It means that they won't engage with you anymore. So keep your offer and your creatives interesting, relevant, and enticing to drive them back to your website for them to learn more about your brand.
Fantastic. Shaheen, for people who haven't done it before, sometimes do you see people getting overwhelmed and getting sort of caught too much up into too many details and forgetting those core ingredients? And what are those sort of key advice messages you give people at that early point?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this, right? Happens all the time that you get overwhelmed. I think, so the first thing that you got to think about is when you're doing programmatic, what are the components that goes in it? And Sumeri touch on a lot of them. What I would say, the caveat here is it also depends per organization. If you're Oracle and you're doing programmatic and your average contract value is, the lower end is $500,000, the upper end is $500 million, versus a smaller company that, might be a couple of, tens of thousands of dollars for smaller deals and a couple of 100,000 for bigger deals. Obviously it depends, right? But what you want to think about is when you're running programmatic ABM, you obviously want to have an advertising strategy. So how do I put my ads in front of these people? And that is, with platforms like RoarWorks, or it could be LinkedIn or whatever it is. Like, how are you going to put your ads in front of them? Sumeri touched on this. Account selection. Talk to sales, get their accounts. But also there's a caveat that comes with that. Don't always listen to what sales says, because what I've seen happens in organizations is, so you say, all right, we're going to do an ABM for our most important accounts. And sales comes in and say, oh, here is Commonwealth Bank. We've never been able to close them. We're doing whatever we can to open up this door in these accounts. Now we're doing ABM. Let's put them in the ABM program. That is your ABM program set for failure, because there's a reason we haven't been able to open up a door, and that maybe we're not a good fit. Maybe it's a product thing. Maybe it's just that from a procurement we're not a good fit. Maybe from a security perspective we didn't take it, whatever it is. Take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes sales get excited and give all their hardest accounts, and they say put it in the ABM program. So that's the only caveat I would say with account selection. But the other component is intent. So can you work with a provider that can give you intent data, meaning you can see which companies are in the market for what you're trying to sell? So that's another component of it. Then you bring in sales, and sales, or let's say sales development, and we're talking specifically for net new acquisition of logos. So sales brings logos, brings emails and calls into the picture. Again, all of these are pretty standard for programmatic ABM, but you have to be careful in terms of how much personalization you make in these. In terms of the most fundamentals, I'd say think about your advertising strategy. Make sure you select the right accounts, and especially if you're running this is the first time that you're running it, don't go after the creme de la creme accounts. Don't go after the best of the best. Go at maybe tier 2, so you can practice and you can run the first campaign of your tier 2 accounts before you go after the great ones. And then engage with sales in terms of, and that could be from emails, calls, and also, again, if there's budget, LinkedIn social selling and outreach with LinkedIn. And I see a question out there with regards to frequency from Louis. For us, in terms of messages, now that is only the last piece, the sales development piece that I talked about. Cadences could be, also depends on the geography and where you're at, but cadences could be, somewhere around maybe 7 to 12 touches over a period of a month when you're going after someone. That's our experience and what we kind of do that. But as I said, geographies differ. And if you are in Asia Pacific or in, for example, Malaysia or Japan, the touches would go down versus Australia. The US, I've seen 16, 20 touch sequences, which is people would start cursing at you here in Australia if you do that.
Okay, fantastic. And shall we, from a platform perspective, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think both Shaheen and Sumari covered off on it really well. So at Rollworks, we do talk about kind of 4 key areas as far as ABM readiness. So a lot of those you guys already touched on. So that marketing and sales alignment, understanding your systems and can you integrate, and then identifying those target accounts. I think the only other thing I would add is the measurement aspect. So I think it is important to understand ahead of launching a campaign, really understand how to measure ABM success and what that looks like, and then establish your baseline. So have that baseline so that once you do launch, you can then start to really see that progression with your accounts.
Fantastic. And Sumari, jumping back to you now, what are the key tactics used in programmatic ABM campaigns, and how should you choose which are the best to deploy for your campaign?
I prefer to use various tactics for ABM programmatic programs because you do get different insights and outcomes depending on the objectives you want to achieve. So the most common tactic is using a platform like Rollworks, targeting and discovering accounts based on best fit, in-market intent, and engagement using display and video ads, driving to your website to download or engage with specific offers. But we need to rely on all these visitors to actually come to your website and then engage in a form so that you are able to identify the contacts within that account. So what I prefer to do is mix that up. As Shaheen said, it's really, really important to understand what your advertising strategy is going to look like and what you're going to get from the different channels that you want to use. So I also combine this tactic with content syndication, where I can either use our own CRM data, targeted account list from that data, or leverage the Rollworks newly discovered accounts, to retarget them with DocuSign content via third-party publications. And I'm also linking social media platforms like LinkedIn. This way, I'm able to target key roles within the buying teams from these identified accounts and generate contacts for the sales teams to go reach out and nurture, which is a little bit more specific than just driving through a platform like Rollworks at this point in time. So we find that a multi-channel programmatic ABM approach works very well for us, as it helps us to identify those accounts in market, put a relevant messaging framework in place for them to nurture them, to get to progress them through the buying journey, but using different tactics with always that targeted account approach. That's really important, whether that is your own targeted account list that you've decided in alignment with your business stakeholders to go after, or whether it is newly discovered accounts that you use, that you get from your platforms and the intent signals that you have access to make sure that you are nurturing those guys through the buying journey. And so yeah, it's really important to mix that up with different channels than just one specific technology or one specific channel.
Fantastic. And Shelby, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, so thinking back about just how important it is to be going after the best accounts and prioritizing the right accounts. There's really 4 key tools that we leverage to help customers identify which accounts those are. So we use account scoring modeling, which essentially is taking your list of target accounts, running an assessment against your best current customer list to identify the firmographic and technographic makeup of your current customers, and then we can grade the individual accounts on your target list. By doing that, you can then segment your list to just go after those best fit accounts. Similar to like Sumari mentioned, leveraging the intent and engagement signals. So understanding both the in-market signals that we're seeing across the web, as well as engagement directly on your site to prioritize who you want to target. And then lastly, what we refer to again as the journey stages. So that fully customized buying journey, you can really create these hyper-targeted audiences where you can deliver content specific to where your customer accounts are in that buying journey. So just to give you a couple examples of what that could look like, if your objective is to discover new accounts, then you might want to leverage the intent or the ICP modeling, which is our account scoring. If you're looking to cross-sell or upsell, then leveraging those journey stages and going after accounts in specific stages within their opportunity or deals would be a good way to do that. Another thing is if you're working off of a massive list of accounts, you could potentially leverage all four to prioritize and find, okay, what are the best fit in market and engaged accounts to target. And then I would just reiterate, like Sumari said, taking that multi-channel orchestration approach is going to be your best model.
Fantastic. Shaheen, now let's jump to finding the right balance between customization and scale. Why is it so important to do that? Take us through that and why I suppose it can be so critical to the campaign.
I think it comes back to the rabbit hole, the customization rabbit hole, right? And what happens in a lot of situations is that someone is sitting down and they're like, okay, we're running ABM, and ABM is about accounts, and it's about customizing our message for accounts. Okay, so how much am I going to customize? So I can customize per vertical. Great. I got financial services, and I'm going to customize stuff for financial services. All right, that's fantastic. Now I can customize at an account level, or maybe a sector in banking. So maybe, okay, now I'm gonna customize for retail banking. Great. Now I can customize for the accounts. I can maybe develop messaging for, you know, these 20 retail banks that I have in my list, and start doing further customization there. Oh, I can customize for buying centers within those retail banks. So I'm interested in whoever is in charge of the people in charge of IT. I'm interested in people who are in charge of, I don't know, the procurement for retail banking and so on and so forth, right? So, and then lastly, you're like, oh, but what if I can find personal information about the IT manager at this company? And do I personalize it at that level as well? So it's just like, how much resources do you have? How far can you go? That is the biggest challenge. And what I found is it usually takes you a couple of trials, and I'm biased of saying this. It helps to bring someone in who's done this before. It helps tremendously. And obviously we run an ABM agency. We're biased to say that, but I've seen really that component help, because the question is, how far do I personalize for what tier? And I think what the rule of thumb is, think about the least amount of personalization that you can do for programmatic ABM. And the reason I say that is because marketers, when they think about ABM, they think way too much about personalization at the beginning. So just dial that back. And that's where you said with programmatic. So you can do a lot of personalization at the ad level. And I think it's good to think about personalization at an industry or vertical level. That's a good level to play at with regards to your personalization. As you go higher up the pyramid, you start seeing things like dedicated landing pages, dedicated microsites for a whole account, dedicated messaging for a specific account from the sales team, creating reports for accounts, like these things you see when you go higher up. But my take and what we've seen work is best to think about a vertical. That's the limit that you want to go at. Maybe work with your sales development team to do maybe a very light touch of personalization in their messaging. But if you are targeting 1,000 accounts, 2,000 accounts, be very mindful of how deep you're going to go into the rabbit hole of personalization.
Okay. Suri, how do you ensure you find the right balance between that customization and scale balance?
Yeah, I agree with Shaheen. You don't have to go too personalized with ABM programmatic, and that's the beauty of it, because for ABM programmatic, you typically have the ability to target a couple of hundred up to thousands of accounts across different industries. So your program really needs to be able to scale easily, which means it might not be always as practical to and cost effective to go highly personalized and tailored due to limited time and resources. However, from a marketing lens perspective, it's really important that you do have some sort of personalization in there, so that you make sure that you have a targeted message that resonates with your target audience at the different stages of the journey. So I would typically use two approaches. One is looking at creating cluster campaigns, as Shaheen was saying. For example, if financial services is your sweet spot, then you can go targeted with financial services messaging or banking or insurance specific messaging to target that specific profile and that account. You can still keep it high level, but without going to a contact level personalization. And then the other broader strategy that I would propose is to look at it from a customer journey perspective. Where are they in their buying journey? So typically what we find works really, really well is to think about your messaging strategy from an awareness perspective, a consideration perspective, and a conversion perspective. What are the messages that you want to communicate to that audience in their journey without being too specific and too tailored and too resource heavy? So those two approaches typically helps you to scale your programmatic ABM more effectively.
Fantastic. Shelby, from a platform perspective, take us through that balance between customization and scale.
Yeah, so I would fully agree. We have seen customers that have been able to take a highly personalized one-to-one approach, but I think there's two critical components that you have to consider if you ever are contemplating taking that approach. And that is having really strong sales alignment as well as the technology in place. So having those integrations and that dynamic capability is critical. The example I'm thinking of specifically was Snowflake was able to do a hyper personalized approach across like 2,000 accounts, but they had to do extensive upfront planning to develop a multi-channel sequencing and messaging matrix. So to reiterate what Sumri and Shaheen already said as well, is if you don't have those resources and that alignment with sales, then I would agree taking more of a one-to-few approach where you're doing the personalization at whether it's an industry level or across accounts that have similar challenges, then I would take more of that approach.
Fantastic. Got a question from one of the audience members here, Anne Tran. Shaheen, what are some of the most important metrics to keep an eye on when optimizing a programmatic ABM campaign?
I think the most important component is benchmarking between where you were before and where you are now. And what I mean by that is, and this is probably the most meaningful metric, right? So you can measure, and there's value in them. You can measure account engagement. So how many accounts didn't know about us. Now they've like engaged with some of our ads. Therefore, they're aware and engage and so on and so forth. And those are good metrics to look at. And a lot of, again, advertising platforms would offer that, like Rollworks. One of the things that I see that is very fascinating is to go in the organization, especially if you have an outbound model where the sales team is reaching out to target accounts on their own, maybe at this point, and look at, okay, if we're reaching out to 100 accounts, how many meetings is our sales development team able to book? So let's say we have a 2% conversion rate. So out of 100 accounts that they're reaching out to, there are 2 meetings that happen. Okay, great. Now you have a benchmark. And what we've seen time and time again is by putting you bring a more sophisticated lens on this, and you're now running an ABM program, a programmatic ABM program, and you have these ads going, you really finesse your messaging and so on and so forth. Now you go back to the conversion, and you're like, okay, now we were targeting 100 accounts. How did that conversion change? And what we see multiple times is that conversion goes up, right? But it's really important to have that data beforehand, and then go back and see how did that change over the campaign or the ABM program that you ran. And that's probably the most meaningful component, because keep in mind, you're dealing with sales, right? So you're not working in silo. You have to show sales that this is also working. You have to show leadership. Those are some of the numbers, those benchmark numbers of like, hey, this is where we're at. This is what happens when we don't run an ABM campaign. These are the numbers, and this is where we're at when we do run a campaign. That's probably the best way to look at those conversion points, especially when it comes to the sales side and in the early stages of sales engagement, to see what improvements you start to see. But I also love to hear Shelby's thoughts on this, because I think you would have a lot of data coming in as well. Yeah, what are your thoughts, Shelby?
Yeah, so I would absolutely agree on the perspective of establishing that baseline. I think one of the things that I caution is, and I think what you described makes sense, but what I often see is oftentimes customers will try to measure their ABM the same way they do other traditional marketing channels. And so, for example, if you're running web retargeting or contact targeting, those metrics look at click-through rate conversions are fully appropriate. But I would definitely encourage people to consider, okay, how to actually look at ABM in a slightly different lens. And so considering that ABM is really about that quality over quantity. So at its core, what you're looking to accomplish with ABM is you're looking to drive larger deals, faster deals, and better close rates. And so essentially, depending on your objective of what you're running with your campaign, that's going to inform your primary KPIs. So to give a couple examples, if you were doing an air cover nurture play, you might look, okay, what was our reach across the accounts and that overall engagement on our site? Did we drive an increase? But also you'll look at, did we influence net new opportunity or deal creation and that pipeline revenue? And then another example being, let's say your play is actually pipeline acceleration. So then you're going to start to look at, okay, did we help to progress these accounts through the different opportunity or deal stages? Did we influence closed won opportunity, both volume and revenue? And then what did those closed deal rates look like? And was there an improvement in the time to close? So to your point, having that baseline, you can see those improvements over time.
Fantastic. Sticking with you now, Shelby, you're obviously based in the United States, and which is, quite different market to APAC. How do some of the techniques applied need to be tweaked to suit the APAC market, which is often smaller and more fragmented?
Yeah, so this will depend on the ABM platform that you're using, but I can speak to specifically at Rollworks. So here at Rollworks, we do have a global presence, and based on our data methodology, we do have a 90% account match rate across regions outside of North America. So we have a really strong reach in those regards. Where some modifications may come into play is when you think about starting to layer in those buyer persona attributes. That's where you can start to run into some limitations with data availability. So typically what we would recommend in running a campaign in other regions would be to potentially not try to layer on the buyer persona attributes. And then the other thing would be, like we've touched on, making sure to deploy multiple campaign tactics. So incorporating things such as web retargeting, contact targeting, social, LinkedIn campaigns to basically supplement your ABM programs so that you're reaching accounts through different tactics and channels.
It's fantastic. That's great insight. Shaheen, now obviously being based in APAC, what are some of the key mistakes that practitioners make when applying programmatic ABM campaigns here?
We were talking about this before we jump on, where what we see ABM being very popular, especially in the APAC region, is with organizations that have an HQ in the US, and it makes sense, because what happens is you see your peers practicing ABM either in EMEA or in North America, and you have that contact and you have that support, and therefore you start to roll out ABM in the APAC APJ region. So those are most of the activity, ABM activity in the APAC region is coming from those companies. And because of that, the biggest challenge is keeping in mind that what works in EMEA or what works in North America you cannot copy that and implement it in the region. In EMEA, it's extremely popular. When people are looking at ABM, programmatic is not as popular as it is, for example, in the US. A lot of organizations in EMEA are practicing one-to-one ABM, one-to-few, but also really kind of like pure one-to-few, that we have like 10 accounts in a cluster and we're marketing to 10 accounts. Where in the US, you start to see a lot more programmatic, where there's a large number of accounts, there's thousands of accounts that are being targeted. When you come to APAC, there is a middle part that is that it starts to feel like the right balance, because you don't have as many large accounts as you have in the US. You also might not have the budgets that EMEA has to focus on those one-to-one and those pure one-to-few models. So the most important thing is getting the strategy for APAC right, and doing some work, getting educated on ABM models, getting educated on ABM strategy, so that you can implement that across APAC. You also have a lot of geographies, right? So you have, even though you talk to Europeans, they would say, Europe is very diverse. When you look at APAC, you're talking about India, Australia, and Japan in one market. Like, those are like businesses done so differently in some of those spaces. So taking that into consideration is an important factor that is different from Australia, between APAC and EMEA and North America. That's the biggest thing to think about, that the copy and paste might not work as well as you would like it to.
Simran, you're also working across APAC. Is that sort of similar sentiments that you share, or have you sort of found a different experience?
No, that's exactly what we experience, because as you know, DocuSign is headquartered in the US, and they definitely more matured markets, and they are more further along with their ABM efforts than we are in APAC. But what we have seen and what we've experienced, they are better at the one-to-one and one-to-few approach, where in EMEA it is the one-to-one and one-to-few, a mix of those, where in APAC, ABM programmatic made the most sense for us to start, because we realized how important it is to implement an ABM strategy for our larger accounts, but we needed the time to bring our stakeholders on the journey with us, to align with our sales counterparts on which accounts to target. So we started our programmatic ABM campaigns before moving on to our one-to-few approaches. And this helped us drive awareness in those accounts that is important to our business, but also helped us to show the value of using an ABM approach. And that helped us to get buy-in from our stakeholders to drive a broader ABM strategy.
Fantastic. I'll jump to a question from the audience here.
Andrew,
go for it,
Shane. There's one other thing that I thought about, and I think it's important to bring up. The other big difference is data. And I know everyone's like, oh my God, here we go, data. Everyone's talking about data. But it makes a massive difference. And what I mean by data is you got to think about your data provider, like who is providing your data, because there are companies that are have these databases that are extremely mature for North America, and they work great, and your HQ might be using those tools, but they will flop when you bring them to APAC because they don't have that data. One of the things that I really like about Rollworks. We'll talk about this after the call. Get my commission, but Shelby. But no, one of the things, on a very serious note, one of the things that I really like about Rollworks is the data maturity. and Rollworks as a whole is an advertising company, and your parent companies, and I don't know how the data sharing works, but it's a lot more mature in the APAC region when it comes to targeting some of the other ABM providers. And this is just one example. So thinking about the providers and the vendors that you work with, they're not necessarily going to be the same as HQ, because it can very well fall flat if you bring in a North American vendor or an EMEA vendor into APAC. That's the other thing that I want to mention.
Yeah, fantastic.
I can,
Yeah.
sorry, Andrew, I can
No,
add
go
to
for it.
that. That's exactly what happened with our approach. So our EMEA and North America counterparts are using a different platform than what we are using in APAC for that particular reason. We chose our platform partner based on the reach and the coverage and the data that we can get that is applicable to our market, rather than trying to fit a US centric or EMEA centric vendor into APAC, which is not ideal for our market situation. So yeah, we are a great example of that strategy.
Yeah, fantastic. It's so good to get that comparison between those two markets and how to apply it here in APAC. I'll jump now to a question from the audience. This is from Retno Lestari, and I'll open this up to the whole panel. So whoever wants to jump in, feel free. With advertising involved, how does it affect media buying and the media planning itself for the brand? Because different advertising has a different rate of success. What should we focus on other than responses from the existing market? Who wants to jump in there? Is that sort of one that you guys have experienced, or Shaheen, was there any sort of insight there that you could sort of bring across?
What I would say is that it would be great if Retno could clarify a little bit more on this. I'm not completely sure the angle take on this. I don't know if Sumeri, you have any thoughts.
I can maybe try to answer that to some extent, because my role is broader than just ABM programmatic. So I am on the whole buying side of paid media, and ABM programmatic is just part of that. So I hope I'm answering your question correctly, but what I'm trying to establish is what is the most effective channel and medium that would reach the audience that you want to target for that particular objective that you have for that campaign that you're running. So for ABM programmatic, for example, it's a little bit different than my demand gen campaigns on LinkedIn. I would have slightly different messaging, slightly different creative, more personalized, more tailored than what I would do for a general LOB campaign on LinkedIn, for example. So I hope that helps.
Okay, yeah, very good. And another one here from Ben Stiles. Again, open it up to the whole panel. Everyone is sick of email and LinkedIn spam and all the one-liners that are being used. Quotes, I know you're busy, I know you're important, let me get to the point. Contrast these targeted messages with target awareness and creative. What metrics can be used to measure when audience is ready to be engaged more directly?
Yeah, I think I can hop in on that. So that ties back to those intent signals and engagement signals. So being able to understand based on intent topics or keywords, or maybe specific landing pages on your site, establishing a certain threshold. But if you start to understand, okay, which accounts are actually showing these signals, then you know that you can get in front of them and they're actually looking for something that you have to offer, as opposed to almost the idea of a cold call and trying to drum up some interest from an account when they may not need what you have to offer.
Shaheen, was there sort of an element that you could add to that? Like, I suppose it is a tough one, you know, knowing where that point is, because it can make such a difference to the impact and the results when you get that sort of right.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you need some tools for that.
Yeah.
Right. That's really like, and the main thing is you need to know, hey, who knows us and are they interested? Okay. And you need some tools in order to accomplish that. So you need to be able to tell what are some of the accounts who've been on your website, right? Whether it's reverse IP tracking or cookie tracking, whatever it is, who are these people? You need to know, if you're running advertising, who are the accounts that are engaging with the advertising, right? And then you want to create a scoring model, just like Shelby was talking about, so that you then take an account across the line when they cross that a certain score that you have. So then you reach out. And what happens is, again, I don't know, Shelby, if you have any data on this, but one of the things that we've seen is when you run these campaigns, you see a lift of about 20 to 30% in response rate. Because when you reach out to somebody, they're like, I've seen your brand. I've seen you guys are doing a few things in the market. I'm more likely to have a chat. Mm-hmm. Great example. We had, I get targeted for example, participating in research, right? And people would reach out and be like, we're offering, I don't know, $500 for, this thing. And it just happens quite often. And I'm like, no, forget about it. We had one person reach out from Forrester. Now, Forrester, obviously everybody in the B2B would know who they are. They have such a strong brand presence that I was like, you know what, I'd like to be part of what Forrester is doing, what they're thinking about. So that comes back to your brand awareness. And what you're really trying to do with your advertising is to build and reinforce that brand awareness as much as possible. It's harder for companies who don't have brand awareness, but you have to start somewhere. It's easier for those who have some sort of share of voice, or whatever you want to call it, share of mind in a prospect's range of thinking, a spectrum of thinking. So it's easier for those, but you have to start from somewhere, and it does lift all the other engagements when you get that engagement awareness through your ads. But again, lastly, I'll repeat myself, you need some tools for that.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, and just coming back to what I've said earlier in the conversation, is it is really important when you think about personalization in your messaging strategy to think about those different stages of the journey. As Shaheen is saying, some of these accounts that you want to go after hasn't even come to your website in the first place ever. So you want to attract them, but they're obviously not going to be ready to buy from you immediately or even engage with you. They need to see your brand and they need to see your ads quite a few times before they're going to start engaging and come visit your website for the first time. So it is really valuable to build that full funnel strategy into your messaging framework so that you can make sure that you are driving some sort of awareness within those accounts as well. Because sometimes these larger accounts also have different departments and divisions. One division is using your platform or your solution, but another division is struggling with some pain points, but they don't even know that a business unit next to them is using you. So it's really important that you build that awareness and that consideration, content and messaging into your messaging strategy for your ABM programs.
Fantastic. Look, there've been so many great insights today. That sort of brings us about ready to sort of come to time. I just wanted to see, Shaheen, in terms of trends moving forward, how do you see things playing out over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of things people should be out looking for, or things people should be looking for to incorporate into their campaigns, and just a general awareness?
I think Shelby very briefly touched on this. What we're going to probably see is tightening of budgets in the coming months. Just because of how the market is. It's already happened in especially some of the US-based companies across APAC. Budgets are a little bit tighter. There's a more granular focus on where things are being spent, and that's probably going to happen with some of the Australian-based organizations as well. And I think approaching marketing from looking at the most important accounts and marketing to them is going to become even more important in the coming months, because the more you can get rid of the noise, to get rid of the things that might not be working, and focusing on the right accounts and nurturing them as much as possible is going to become more important as budgets get tightened up. So I think ABM has been growing quite steadily in the APAC. I think that's just going to be reinforced further. We are seeing, and we're going to further see vendors enter the market with more mature data, and that's very exciting as well. And I think those are the two probably strong drivers for ABM going forward. Just going to make a lot more business sense, and we're going to get a lot more maturity from the tech side.
Fantastic. That brings us to a wrap. That's great insights. Hope everyone got a lot out of that and received some really good insights. If there is any more questions, make sure you send them through to the team at xGrowth. We'll be sending out a recap of today's webinar so you can go through some of those great insights again in your own time and also share on with your network. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks a lot, everybody.